They laughed at him for choosing an old house, but the end left everyone speechless. The laughter echoed across the vacant lot as Nathan Cooper signed the purchase papers. At 28, the young carpenter had invested all his savings in a property everyone considered a monumental mistake. "You've completely lost your mind, boy," shouted Walter Simmons, one of the most respected merchants in the neighborhood, pointing at the crumbling structure. "This house has been falling apart for over 15 years. Walter's friend, Frank Peterson, shook his head in disapproval, his hat slightly crooked as he laughed. "Nathan, my boy, you've thrown your money away. No one can restore this ruin without spending a fortune." Behind the two men, Dorothy Cooper watched the scene with a heavy heart. Nathan's mother had spent weeks trying to talk him out of the idea, but her son had always been stubborn. Now, seeing the neighbors' cruel laughter, she felt equal parts shame and worry. Nathan stood with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, trying to keep his composure under the taunts. His beige shirt was stained with sweat, not just from the midday heat, but from the tension of the moment. "You'll see," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "This house has potential." Walter let out an even louder laugh. "Potential? Boy, the only potential this house has is to collapse on your head." The property truly didn't inspire confidence. The front boards were peeling, several windows had broken panes, and the roof had holes that let rain pour right in. The surrounding lot was overgrown with tall weeds and years of accumulated debris. Dorothy stepped closer to her son, gently touching his arm. "Nathan, there's still time to cancel the purchase. The real estate agent said you have 48 hours to back out." "I'm not backing out, Mom. I know what I'm doing." Frank Peterson removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Son, I've been in construction for over 20 years. I've seen houses in bad shape, but this one's beyond repair. You'll have to tear it all down and start from scratch." "And even then," Walter added, "the lot isn't worth half what you paid. Everyone knows this area has flooding issues." Nathan's stomach tightened. Flooding issues? That hadn't been mentioned during negotiations. "What's this about flooding?" The two men exchanged a knowing glance, as if they'd finally found the perfect argument. "Oh, you didn't know," Walter smirked. "Every year when it rains hard, this part of the neighborhood ends up underwater. That's why this house sat abandoned so long." Dorothy's legs felt weak. If this was true, her son had made an even bigger mistake than she'd thought. "Nathan, for heaven's sake, let's go talk to the real estate agent right now." But the young man didn't move. There was something about the two men's insistence, almost urgency, that didn't sit right with him. "Why do you care so much about what I do with my money?" The question caught Walter off guard. For a moment, his mocking smile faded. We're just trying to keep a young man from making a terrible mistake." "That's right," Frank agreed, putting his hat back on. "We've been neighbors a long time. We don't want to see you drown in debt for nothing." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. Nathan studied the house more carefully. Despite the obvious decay, the main structure seemed solid. The walls were made of thick bricks, the kind we didn't make anymore. The shape of the building, even beneath the layer of neglect, suggested an interesting architecture. "I'm keeping the house," he finally declared. Walter and Frank exchanged another glance, this time with more serious expressions. "You'll regret this, boy," said Walter, his voice losing its mocking tone. "You'll regret it bitterly." The two men walked away, but Nathan noticed they stopped just a few feet off, whispering and frequently glancing back toward the property. Dorothy let out a deep sigh. "Son, I don't understand your stubbornness. You worked so hard to save that money." "Mom, I have a feeling about this house. I can't explain it, but something tells me it hides more than it shows. The feeling won't pay the bills, Nathan." He knew his mother was right. At 28, he was at an age where he should be making practical, sensible decisions. But ever since he first saw the house 3 weeks ago, he felt an inexplicable pull toward the property. The discovery had been accidental. Nathan had been looking for land to build his own house, when the real estate agent said it awkwardly, mentioned he had a property with potential on the north side of town. price was so far below market value it almost seemed like a mistake. When Nathan asked why, the agent gave vague answers about selling difficulties and the owner's urgent need. Now, standing in front of the house, he was beginning to understand those selling difficulties better. "Let's at least take a look inside," Dorothy suggested, resigned. "Since you've already bought it, I need to know what my son's gotten himself into." Nathan pulled the keys from his pocket. The key ring was heavy, with more keys than he'd expected for a simple house. Some were clearly old, of a style no longer used. The front door creaked loudly as he opened it. The sound echoed through the entire structure, as if the house were protesting the intrusion. The smell of mold and dampness hit them immediately. Dorothy covered her nose with her hand, grimacing. My God, what a horrible smell! The inside was worse than the outside. The walls bore dark stains of moisture. The wooden floorboards were warped in several places and chunks of plaster had fallen from the ceiling, littering the floor. But Nathan was fascinated by the architectural details. The door frames were hand-carved, with woodwork he recognized as being of the highest quality. The high ceilings gave a sense of space, despite all the debris. "Look at the size of these rooms, Mom, and see these moldings. This was done by real craftsmen." Dorothy preferred to focus on more practical problems. "Nathan, there's water damage everywhere. We'll need to redo all the wiring, all the plumbing. This is going to cost a fortune." They walked down the central hallway, exploring each room one by one. The house was larger than it seemed from the outside, with more divisions than usual for homes in the area. In the kitchen, Nathan stopped in front of a built-in cabinet that covered an entire wall. The wood was stained, but the structure seemed solid. "That's odd," he murmured, examining the hinges. "Why would anyone make such a big cabinet in a simple house?" Dorothy was more concerned with the cracked sink and the tiles falling off the wall. "Son, I'm starting to agree with the neighbors. Maybe it's best to tear it all down and start from scratch." "No, Mom. This house has history. Look at these details." He opened the built-in cabinet door and found deep shelves, much deeper than necessary for a normal kitchen. At the back, there was another, smaller door. "What's this door?" Dorothy approached, curious despite her worries. "It must be a storage room. Old houses had these extra spaces." Nathan tried to open the small door, but it was stuck. He had to force it a bit before it budged. On the other side, they found a small pantry with shelves on the side walls. But what caught their attention was the floor. There was a wooden trapdoor partially covered by old burlap sacks. "My God," Dorothy whispered. "This house has a basement?" "Seems like it." Nathan moved the sacks aside and tried lifting the trapdoor. The wood was swollen from moisture, but after a few tugs he managed to open it. A steep ladder descended into darkness. The air rising from below was even heavier with dampness and mold. "We're not going down now," Dorothy said firmly. "Not without a good flashlight and knowing if this ladder can hold our weight." Nathan agreed, but he was intrigued. Throughout the negotiation, no one had mentioned the house had a basement. Not the real estate agent nor the previous owner. They closed the trapdoor and left the pantry. As they continued exploring the house, Nathan couldn't stop thinking about the basement. Why had it been hidden? And why had no one mentioned its existence? Upstairs, they found 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The condition was equally poor, but Nathan kept noticing details that sparked his professional admiration. "This window frame is genuine mahogany," he said, examining one. "This stuff costs a fortune nowadays. And what good is it if it's all rotting?" "It's not rotting, Mum. It just needs care. Look." He showed how the window, despite its rough appearance, still worked perfectly. The opening mechanism was intact, it just needed cleaning and waxing. In the main bedroom, they found something unexpected, a small fireplace, completely unusual for houses in the area. "Who puts a fireplace in a hot place like this?" Dorothy asked. "Someone who came from a cold place," Nathan replied thoughtfully, "or someone who wanted to give the house a special touch." He crouched by the fireplace and noticed old ashes at the bottom, as if it had been used recently. But that was impossible. The house had been abandoned for over 15 years. "Mom, come see this." Dorothy approached and saw the ashes. Maybe squatters used the house as shelter. Could be. But Nathan was certain the doors and windows had been securely locked when they arrived. How could anyone have gotten in? They finished their tour in the attic, a spacious area under the roof that could be turned into another bedroom. There, Nathan found several old boxes stacked in a corner. Probably things the previous owner forgot, Dorothy said, or left behind on purpose. Nathan opened one of the boxes and found old documents, some dating back to the 1950s. There were certificates, contracts, and several black and white photographs. "Look at this, Mom." He showed her a photo of the house in its prime. The property was impeccable, with a well-kept garden and a white-painted wooden fence. People were posing in front. A well-dressed man in a suit, a woman in a vintage dress, and 2 children. How beautiful this house was, Dorothy sighed. You can almost picture what it must have been like to live here. And it will be like that again, Nathan declared with determination. When they went back downstairs, they found Walter and Frank waiting on the porch. The 2 men looked impatient. "So," Walter asked, "seen enough to realize you made a bad deal?" "Actually," Nathan replied, "I'm even more convinced it was a good buy." Frank shook his head disapprovingly. "Kid, you're more stubborn than a mule, no helping you." "Why are you so set on making me give up?" Nathan asked directly. "What's your interest in this house?" The 2 men exchanged glances again, visibly uncomfortable with the question. "We have no interest at all," Walter said too quickly. "We just want to keep you from getting hurt." "That's right," Frank agreed. "We're just being good neighbors." But Nathan noticed something in their expressions that didn't match their words. There was anxiety, maybe even fear. "Well, thanks for your concern, but I'm keeping the house." Dorothy said goodbye to the neighbors and walked her son to the car. On the way back, she tried once more to convince him to reconsider. "Son, I know you get excited about restoration projects. You always have, ever since you were little. But this is too big for one person." "I won't do it all alone, Mum. I'll hire help for what I can't handle." "And where's the money for that coming from? You spent all your savings on the purchase." It was true. Nathan had used every penny he had to buy the property. He'd have to work hard and save every cent to restore the house. "I'll take it one step at a time. First, fix the most urgent problems, then, little by little, improve the rest." "And where will you live in the meantime? That house isn't fit for living in." "I'll stay in my apartment for now." Dorothy sighed. She knew her son well enough to realize arguing was pointless. Once Nathan made up his mind, especially about work, it was hard to change it. The next day, Nathan returned to the house early, carrying his tools and a powerful flashlight. He wanted to explore the basement more thoroughly before starting any renovations. Walter and Frank appeared almost immediately, as if they'd been watching the property. "Starting demolition already?" Walter asked hopefully. "I'm not demolishing anything. I'm restoring it." "Nathan," Frank said, trying for a friendlier tone, "we talked last night and decided to make an offer. How about we buy the house from you, for the same price you paid, of course?" The offer surprised Nathan. If the house was really such a bad deal as they claimed, why were they interested in buying it? "No thanks. It's not for sale." "Think about it," Walter insisted. "You get your money back with no loss, and you avoid a headache. The only headache I have is you 2 trying to talk me out of keeping my house." The 2 men walked away, but Nathan noticed they stopped at the corner, still watching the property. He entered the house and went straight to the pantry. Flashlight in hand, he carefully descended the basement stairs. The space below was larger than he'd imagined. The basement stretched under the entire house. With multiple rooms and corners he couldn't see clearly even with the flashlight. The smell of dampness was strong, but there was another odor he couldn't place, something sweet and slightly sickening. Moving slowly, he examined the stone and brick walls. The construction was solid, the kind that lasted centuries. In some spots, there were niches carved into the walls, as if made to hold specific objects. In a far corner, he found stacks of boxes like the ones he'd seen in the attic. He opened one and found more old documents, but this time they were business papers, sales receipts, shipping records, correspondence. Looking closer, he realized they were related to an import-export business. The house's former owner, a man named Richard Blackwood, seemed to have run a thriving trade in the 1940s and 1950s. One letter caught his eye. Dated 1953, it mentioned special merchandise arriving at the harbor that needed discreet storage. Nathan was intrigued. What kind of merchandise needed discreet storage? And why keep these documents in the basement? Continuing his exploration, he found something that left him completely baffled. A wall newer than the others, clearly built after the rest of the basement. The wall blocked what appeared to be a passageway. Why would someone build a wall to seal off a passage in a basement? He tapped lightly on the wall and heard a hollow sound. There was space on the other side. He went upstairs to fetch a sledgehammer and returned determined to knock down the wall. If it was his house, he had the right to know what was in every corner of it. The first few swings revealed the wall was just a thin layer of bricks. Within minutes, he managed to open a hole large enough to crawl through. On the other side, he found a narrow tunnel stretching beyond the reach of his flashlight. What in the world? He murmured to himself. The tunnel was clearly man-made, dug into the earth and reinforced with wood along the sides. The sweet, sickening smell was stronger here. Nathan walked through the tunnel, trying to figure out where it led. After about 50 meters, he reached the end, a staircase leading up to an exit covered by a wooden door. He pushed the door open carefully and found himself in tall brush, roughly 2 blocks from his house. Now everything was starting to make sense. The tunnel connected his house to another point in the neighborhood, allowing people or goods to be transported unseen. Richard Blackwood didn't just run an ordinary import business, he was involved in smuggling. Nathan returned home through the tunnel, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Historical documents, unique architecture, a secret tunnel. His property wasn't just an ordinary house, it was an important piece of local history. When he emerged from the basement, he found Walter and Frank in the kitchen. "How did you get in here?" "The front door was open," Walter said, but his tone wasn't convincing. "No, it wasn't. I locked it when I came in." The two men seemed nervous, constantly glancing toward the pantry. "Listen, Nathan," Frank said, trying to sound casual. "You didn't mess with anything down there, did you? Why do you want to know?" "No reason, just curiosity." But Nathan could tell they knew about the basement, and they probably knew about the tunnel too. "Did you know Richard Blackwood?" The question hit like a bomb. Walter visibly paled and Frank began to stammer. Richard Blackwood? Never heard the name?" "Strange," Nathan said, watching their reactions. "He owned this house for over 20 years. You two being longtime neighbors, you should have known him." "Oh, right, now I remember," Walter said, trying to recover. "But that was so long ago, we barely recall him." "Actually," Nathan pressed on, deciding to push further, "I found some interesting documents about his business. Seems he had diverse activities." Frank and Walter exchanged a look Nathan could only describe as panic. "Listen, kid," Frank said, his voice trembling slightly. "Maybe you shouldn't dig too deep into those old things. Sometimes it's best to let the past lie." "Why? Is there something I should know?" No. It's just old documents might have information that, well, could upset people." Nathan grew more convinced the two were hiding something important. "What people?" "No one specific," Walter said too quickly. "Just general advice." They hurried out of the house, leaving Nathan even more intrigued. Why would two neighbors be so concerned about decades-old documents? That afternoon, he decided to research Richard Blackwood. He searched the public library archives and found several references to the name in old newspapers. Blackwood had been a prosperous merchant, but his reputation wasn't the best. There were rumors he was involved in shady dealings, including smuggling imported goods. A 1954 news story particularly stood out. "Merchant Richard Blackwood mysteriously disappears. Police investigate possible connection to smuggling scheme." According to the article, Blackwood had vanished suddenly, leaving behind all his belongings, including the house. Authorities suspected he had fled to avoid imminent arrest, but the most interesting part came at the end. Neighbors report strange activity on Blackwood's property in the days leading up to his disappearance. Some claim to have seen people carrying heavy boxes in the dead of night. Nathan reread the article, trying to piece things together. If Blackwood was involved in smuggling and used the tunnel to transport goods, what could he have hidden in the house before fleeing? And more importantly, why did Walter and Frank seem to know about it? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. The next day, Nathan decided to explore the basement and tunnel further, but when he arrived at the house, he found the door broken. Someone had entered overnight and ransacked the place. Document boxes were scattered across the floor, papers mixed and torn. In the basement, it was even worse. Someone had broken through several walls, clearly searching for something specific. The wall he had knocked down to access the tunnel was even more damaged, as if someone had tried to widen the opening. Nathan called his mother to tell her about the break-in. "Son, this is getting dangerous. You need to file a police report." "And say what? That someone stole old documents from a smuggler who died 70 years ago?" "Nathan, someone obviously knows something about this house that you don't, and they're willing to break in to get what they want." Dorothy was right. The situation had escalated from neighborhood gossip to an actual break-in. "I'll install a basic security system, cameras and an alarm. And until that's ready, I'll sleep here, in the living room, with a sleeping bag." Dorothy was horrified. "Absolutely not. That house isn't fit for living. What if someone comes back?" "Mom, if I don't keep watch, they'll destroy everything before I figure out what's going on." That night, Nathan did sleep in the house, or at least tried to. Every noise put him on edge, wondering if the intruders had returned. Around 3 in the morning, he heard footsteps upstairs. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking through the rooms. He grabbed a flashlight and a large screwdriver, the closest thing to a weapon he had. He climbed the stairs slowly, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped when he reached the second floor. He searched every room, but found no one. The windows were closed and locked just as he'd left them. But in the master bedroom, he found something unsettling. The fireplace ashes had been disturbed, as if someone had sifted through them with their hands. Nathan examined the ashes with the flashlight and found small pieces of burned paper. Someone had burned documents in the fireplace, likely during the previous break-in. He tried to piece together some of the larger fragments to see if he could read anything. In the flashlight's beam, he could make out a few words: safe, wall, and what looked like north. Back downstairs, he analyzed the situation. The intruders were searching for something specific, something Richard Blackwood had hidden before fleeing, and that something was related to a safe and a wall, possibly on the north side of the house. Nathan took a compass from his phone and determined which was the north wall of the house. It was the kitchen wall, exactly where the large built-in cabinet that had caught his attention on the first day was located. With a borrowed sledgehammer, he began breaking through the back of the cabinet. After several blows, he managed to make a hole in the wall. On the other side, there was an empty space about 2 meters deep, and at the back of that space, embedded in the wall, was an old iron safe. Nathan felt his heart race. He had found what the intruders were looking for. The safe was heavy and seemed to have been sealed for decades. There was no conventional lock, just a rotating dial system with numbers. He went back to the documents left behind from the break-in, searching for any clue about the combination. Among the torn papers, he found a piece of a letter dated 1953, where Richard Blackwood had written, "The birth date of my beloved daughter will always be remembered." If Richard had a daughter, perhaps her birth date was the combination, but how could he find out when she was born? The next day, Nathan returned to the public library and searched for birth records from that time. After hours of research, he found it: Margaret Blackwood, born March 15, 1940, 150340, 6 digits that could be the key to solving the mystery. When he returned to the house, he found Walter and Frank waiting for him on the porch. But this time, they weren't alone. There was a third man, older, whom Nathan didn't recognize. "Nathan," Walter said, his tone more serious than ever, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About things you shouldn't have discovered." The older man introduced himself. "My name is Anthony Reynolds. I was Richard Blackwood's business partner." Nathan felt a chill down his spine. If Anthony was Richard's partner, he knew about the smuggling and probably what was hidden in the safe. His partner in what? Business that ended a long time ago. Business that should have stayed buried. Like the safe in my kitchen wall? The mention of the safe made all three men tense. You found the safe? Anthony asked, trying to stay calm. I did, and I also found the combination. It was a lie, but Nathan wanted to see their reaction. Son, Anthony said, his voice taking on a threatening edge, you have no idea what you're messing with. That safe contains things that could destroy a lot of lives. What kind of things? Documents, lists of names, information about people who preferred to keep certain activities secret. Nathan began to understand. The safe didn't just hold money or valuables. It held evidence of the smuggling scheme, including the names of everyone involved. And the three of you were part of it. Walter and Frank lowered their heads, but Anthony kept his gaze steady. We were young. We needed money. Richard offered an opportunity and we took it. And now you're afraid I'll find your names in those documents. It's not just that, Anthony said. Some of the people involved are still alive. Some have become respected members of the community. If those documents come to light, I see. That's why you wanted me to give up the house so badly. Exactly. And that's why we're willing to make a deal. Anthony pulled an envelope from his pocket. This is double what you paid for the house. You take the money, hand us the keys, and everyone walks away happy. Nathan looked at the envelope. It was a lot of money, more than he made in 2 years of work. With that amount, he could buy a new house ready to move in, no renovations needed. But something inside him rebelled against the idea of taking the bribe. And if I refuse? Then you'll find out that restoring a house can be a lot more dangerous than you think. The threat was clear. Nathan stood at a crossroads. Take the money and give up everything, or face the consequences of uncovering secrets some would rather keep buried. I need to think. You have until tomorrow, said Anthony. After that, we can't guarantee your safety. The three men walked away, leaving Nathan alone with a decision that would change the course of his life. That night, he talked at length with Dorothy about the situation. Son, take the money. This house has already caused too much trouble. But Mum, if I take it, I'll be complicit in everything they did. So what? That happened 70 years ago. It's not your problem. But it's my house, and now it's my responsibility. Dorothy sighed, recognizing her son's stubbornness once again. Then what do you plan to do? I'm opening the safe. I want to know exactly what's inside before making any decision. And what if the documents really implicate innocent people? Then I'll decide what to do based on what I find. The next morning, Nathan returned to the house with renewed determination. He went straight to the safe and entered the combination, 1503 to 40. The mechanism clicked softly and the door opened. Inside the safe were several organized folders, bundles of old money, and a jewelry box. But what caught his attention most was a thick leather-bound notebook. Nathan opened it and found detailed records of all of Blackwood's smuggling operations between 1945 and 1954. Each page contained dates, goods, values, and, most importantly, the names of everyone involved. There were dozens of names from low-level harbor workers to influential merchants and even some local politicians of the time. Walter and Frank were listed as transporters. Anthony appeared as the facilitator. But there were far more prominent names, people Nathan recognized as belonging to the city's old families. Among the documents, he also found letters revealing that the scheme had been uncovered by federal authorities and that Blackwood had fled not only to avoid his own arrest, but to protect everyone involved. One of the last letters, dated just days before Blackwood's disappearance, read, "My dear friend, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back in time. All the evidence is safe in the place where we kept our family treasures. Use this information wisely. Some people deserve a second chance. Others do not." Nathan closed the notebook, feeling the weight of responsibility. In his hands were details that could destroy reputations built over decades, but also the power to protect people who might have gotten involved out of necessity, not greed. As he pondered what to do, he heard cars pulling up in front of the house. He looked out the window and saw not just Anthony, Walter, and Frank, but several others he didn't recognize. "Nathan!" Anthony shouted from the street. "Time's up! Make your choice!" He tucked the notebook into a backpack and stepped outside to face the group. There were about 10 people, all between 50 and 80 years old. "These are some of the people who could be hurt if you're not reasonable," Anthony said. "And what exactly do you want?" "We want you to hand over all the documents you found and accept our payment. And if I don't?" An elegant woman with graying hair stepped forward. "Young man, my husband was part of that scheme when he was just a 20-year-old boy. Today he's a respected merchant, employs over 50 people, and helps many struggling families. If this comes out, not only will he suffer, but so will everyone who depends on him." Others in the group began sharing similar stories. People who had gotten involved in smuggling out of necessity when they were young and desperate, and who later built honorable lives. Nathan felt torn. On one hand, he understood that these people had changed, and that exposing their past could be unfair. On the other hand, he knew that giving in to the pressure meant allowing fear to continue controlling their lives. "I need more time to think." "There's no more time," said Anthony impatiently. "Decide now." "Then my decision is not to decide today." "Boy, you don't understand the gravity of the situation." "I understand perfectly. You're trying to blackmail me to protect secrets from 70 years ago." Nathan went back inside the house and locked the door. The group stayed outside, loudly arguing about what to do. After a few hours they left, but Nathan knew they'd return. That afternoon, he had an idea. Instead of making the decision alone, why not look for Richard Blackwood's daughter? If she were still alive, she'd be 85 now. Using the documents he'd found, he managed to track down Margaret Blackwood. She had married and changed her last name to Cooper, but still lived in town in a nursing home. Nathan went to visit her the next day. Margaret was a lucid and elegant woman, despite her advanced age. When he explained who he was and what he'd found, she smiled sadly. "I wondered when this would happen. 70 years is a long time to keep a secret." "Did you know about the safe?" "Of course I did. My father told me everything before he fled. He said one day someone would buy the house and find the documents. And what did he want done with them?" Margaret stayed silent for a few minutes, looking out the nursing home window. "My father was a complicated man. He got into smuggling because the opportunity arose, but he was never a bad person. When he realized the scheme would be uncovered, he could have fled alone and left everyone else to their fate." "But that's not what he did." "No, he organized the escape to protect as many people as possible, burned the most incriminating documents, hid the remaining ones, and disappeared so the authorities would focus on him and forget the others." Nathan was starting to understand Richard Blackwood's complex personality. So he was a criminal, but with a sense of justice. "Exactly. And he left me one last instruction, which I never forgot." "What instruction?" "That if the documents were ever found, the person who found them should use their own judgment. If they were a good person, they'd know what to do." Margaret looked directly into Nathan's eyes. "You seem like a good person to me." "But how can I know what's right? These people have families, reputation, and you have a conscience. Use it." Nathan left the nursing home even more confused than when he'd arrived. Blackwood's daughter had essentially thrown the responsibility back at him. On his way home, he found his mother waiting for him, visibly worried. "Son, Anthony Reynolds was here looking for you. He said the deadline for your decision ends today." "What else did he say?" "That if you don't be reasonable, they'll take more drastic measures." Dorothy held her son's arm. "Nathan, I'm scared. These people aren't playing around." "I know, Mum. But if I give in now, I'll carry this for the rest of my life. You'd rather carry that than face the consequences of challenging a group of desperate people?" It was a hard question to answer. Nathan was about to respond when he heard cars stopping in front of the house again. This time the group was even larger. There were at least 20 people, including some he recognized as prominent merchants in town. Anthony approached the window. "Nathan, this is your last chance. Come out, and we'll settle this like civilized people. Or else. Or we could just go in there and settle this another way. Dorothy was terrified. Son, for God's sake, take their money. Nathan looked out the window and saw the determination on the faces of the people outside. They were no longer just concerned neighbors. They were people willing to do anything to protect their secrets. But in that moment, he had a revelation. If all those people were so desperate to hide the past, maybe the problem wasn't just the smuggling scheme. Maybe there was something more, something he hadn't uncovered yet. Mom, I need to take one last look at the documents. There's something I'm missing. Nathan, this isn't the time. But he was already heading toward the safe where he'd left some folders he hadn't fully examined. In one of them, he found documents that weren't about smuggling. They were about land, plots, deeds, property transfers, and then he understood everything. The smuggling scheme was just one part of the operation. Blackwood and his partners were also involved in land fraud, buying properties with fake paperwork and then selling them to unsuspecting people. Many of the families now respected in town had built their wealth on land that had been illegally acquired decades ago. Now the desperation of the group outside made sense. They weren't just protecting the reputations of people involved in smuggling. They were protecting entire fortunes built on fraud. Nathan returned to the window with a whole new understanding of the situation. Anthony, he shouted, you're not just protecting names on a smuggling list. You're protecting the fake deeds to those lands. The silence outside was deafening. Anthony had visibly paled. I don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Blackwood wasn't just a smuggler, he was a land thief. And a lot of the people out there are descendants of those who bought land with fake paperwork. A stir went through the crowd. Some people began to back away, clearly uneasy with the revelation. If this comes out, Nathan continued, it won't just be about reputations. It'll be about returning land to its rightful owners. The situation had completely changed. This was no longer about protecting family memories. It was about protecting wealth that might have to be returned if the fraud was proven. Anthony tried to keep his composure. You can't prove anything. Those are old documents. They could be wrong. They could, or they could be right. And if they are, I imagine a lot of people would like to know they have a claim to land they thought was lost forever. Nathan knew he was treading dangerous ground, but he also knew he'd found the real reason behind all the pressure. Final offer, Anthony said. Triple the value of the house. No. 5 times. Still no. Then you've chosen the hard way. The group began to disperse, but Nathan noticed several cars remained on the street, their occupants watching the house. Dorothy was frantic. Son, now you've really gotten yourself into something bigger than you can handle. I know, Mom. But I also know I have something they need more than I need their money. And what's that? The truth. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He knew he'd crossed a line, and the consequences would be serious. But he also knew that, for the first time since buying the house, he was making a decision based on his own values, not fear or outside pressure. Around midnight, he heard noises outside. He looked out the window and saw shadows moving around the house. Someone was trying to get in again, but this time they weren't just intruders looking for documents. It was an organized group trying to surround the property. Nathan grabbed the phone to call the police, but the line was dead. They had cut the telephone wire. He checked his cell phone, but there was no signal. They were probably using some kind of jammer. The situation had escalated to a level he hadn't anticipated. These were no longer just concerned neighbors or merchants trying to protect their reputations. This was an organized group determined to recover the documents by any means necessary. Nathan gathered all the most important documents into a backpack and headed for the basement. If he could reach the tunnel, he might escape and take the evidence to a safe place. But when he got to the basement, he found the tunnel entrance blocked. Someone had dumped debris in the passage, making it impassable. He was trapped. The noises upstairs indicated the group had managed to break into the house. Nathan heard heavy footsteps on the ground floor, then on the second floor. It was only a matter of time before they found the basement entrance. Desperate, he searched for another way out. He examined every wall, every corner, every possible escape route. In one of the darkest corners of the basement, he spotted something he hadn't noticed before. a metal ladder built into the wall leading to a hatch in the ceiling. He climbed the ladder and pushed the hatch open. It led to the backyard, hidden among the tall trees that concealed the exit. Nathan emerged from the basement as if climbing out of a tomb, carrying the backpack with the most important documents. He could hear the group ransacking the house, breaking furniture and walls in search of the papers. He slipped away through the back, moving between neighboring houses until he reached the main street. From there, he went straight to the nearest police station. "I need to speak to the chief of police. It's urgent." The officer on duty looked him up and down. Nathan was covered in dirt and dust from the basement, clearly agitated. "What kind of emergency?" "I'm being threatened by a group of people trying to steal historical documents from my property." Historical documents? Nathan realized how absurd the story sounded when told so briefly. "Look, I know it sounds strange, but I have evidence of crimes committed decades ago, and the people involved are trying to keep that evidence from coming to light." The officer led him to a room where he could explain everything in detail, showing some of the documents as proof. The chief of police, an experienced man named Chief Wilson, listened with growing interest. "If what you're saying is true, this is much more serious than it seems. We're not just talking about trespassing, but organized obstruction of justice." "What about the original crimes? The smuggling and land fraud?" "For crimes committed decades ago, the statute of limitations has passed. But the intimidation happening now is current and punishable." Chief Wilson organized an operation to go to Nathan's house and assess the situation. When they arrived, the property was empty, but completely torn apart. They had broken walls, ripped up floorboards, and destroyed nearly everything in their search for the documents. "They knew exactly what they were looking for," the chief observed, "and they didn't find it because I took it with me." "Good. Now we'll need your help to identify everyone involved." In the following days, Nathan worked with the police to identify the members of the group that had invaded his home. Anthony, Walter, and Frank were arrested, along with several others who had taken part in the operation. But the case took on a scale no one had expected. When the local press caught wind of the story, interest multiplied. This wasn't just about old crimes or trespassing anymore. It was about how entire families had built fortunes on fraudulent foundations and how they had tried to keep it a secret for decades. Several lawyers began taking an interest in the case, seeing the possibility of land restitution lawsuits for families who had been harmed by the fraudulent schemes. Nathan found himself at the center of a media and legal storm he had never imagined. "Son," said Dorothy after yet another day of interviews and meetings with lawyers, "are you sure you want to keep going with this?" "I can't stop now, Mom. This has become bigger than me or our home." "But what about your life, your work, your plans?" It was true. Nathan had become a controversial public figure. Some saw him as a hero who had exposed historical injustices. Others viewed him as an opportunist, destroying respectable families over old papers. His career as a carpenter had suffered. Many of his potential clients were connected to the families involved in the scandal. But there were unexpected positive outcomes too. Several families who had lost land decades ago reached out to thank Nathan. Some, through the documents he had uncovered, were able to prove their rights to properties they thought were lost forever. One such family was led by Mrs. Edith Miller, a 70-year-old woman living in a small house on the outskirts of town. "My grandfather always said our family had a rightful claim to a plot in the city center," she told Nathan. "But we could never prove it because the original documents mysteriously vanished in the 1950s. The papers Nathan found clearly showed that the Miller family's land had been illegally sold by Richard Blackwood to one of the families involved in the scheme. Now, after 70 years, I can finally prove my grandfather was right." Cases like Mrs. Miller's multiplied. Within months, over 20 families had successfully proven their rights to lands they thought were lost forever. But for every family that benefited, there was another forced to return properties they believed were rightfully theirs. The case became a turning point for the town. On one side, families finally achieving justice after decades. On the other, families losing wealth built over generations, even if on fraudulent grounds. Nathan stood in the middle of this urban civil war, bearing the weight of having set it all in motion. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just taken the money and forgotten everything, he confessed to his mother. And what do you tell yourself? That I couldn't live knowing I let injustices stay hidden. Even knowing your decision hurt innocent people? It was the hardest question. Many descendants of the families involved in the original scheme were honest people who bore no blame for their ancestors' crimes. Mom, I didn't create these injustices. I just brought them to light. But bringing them to light has consequences too. Nathan knew she was right. There were no simple answers to something this complicated. As the legal proceedings unfolded, he tried to return to normal life. But his home was destroyed from the break-in, his career was damaged, and he had become a polarizing figure in the community. Then came an unexpected visit. Margaret Blackwood, Richard's daughter, arrived at the ruined house with a lawyer in tow. I came to see what they did to my father's property, she said, surveying the wreckage. I'm sorry about the state of the house. They destroyed almost everything. Margaret walked through the rooms, her expression sad as she took in the damage. Did you know this house was my father's pride? He designed every detail himself, oversaw every step of its construction. I noticed the quality of the architecture. That's why I wanted to restore it. And do you still want to? The question surprised Nathan. I do, but I no longer have the means. I spent all my savings on the purchase, and now I'd have to rebuild almost everything. Margaret smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Then I have a proposal for you. The lawyer accompanying her opened a briefcase and took out some documents. When Richard Blackwood fled, Margaret explained, he left behind not just this house but also a considerable bank account. All these years the money sat untouched, earning interest. And now that I'm officially his only heir, I can access those funds. I want to use them to restore the house. Nathan couldn't believe what he was hearing. But why? Because you did what my father hoped would be done. You used your judgment and chose justice, even knowing it would be hard. Margaret explained she had followed the entire case through the press. I saw how you were threatened, how they destroyed your home, how your life was turned upside down, and I also saw how you never gave up on doing what you thought was right. But many people were hurt, and many others were helped. My father always said justice isn't about making everyone happy. It's about doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Margaret's proposal was simple. She would fully finance the restoration of the house, and Nathan could continue living there. In return, the property would become a memorial about the town's history, including both the good and the bad. The house would tell the whole story, she explained. The smuggling scheme, the land grabs, how families were affected, how justice was finally served after decades. That won't please a lot of people. No, it won't, but it will be honest. Nathan accepted the proposal. In the following months, he worked on restoring the house with a team of specialists hired by Margaret. It was a long and complex process, but also rewarding. Each room was carefully restored to reflect its original architecture, with modern additions that told the property's story. The basement was turned into an exhibit space, displaying the found documents, copies since the originals were with the authorities, and explaining how the smuggling operation worked. The tunnel was preserved as part of the exhibit, allowing visitors to understand how goods were secretly transported. The second-floor bedrooms became themed rooms, each telling the story of a family affected by the case, both those who benefited and those who were harmed. The main room of the house became a space for lectures and discussions on historical justice, land ownership, and how to address past wrongs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. During the restoration, Nathan uncovered more details about Richard Blackwood's personality. He found personal letters that revealed a complex man, torn between ambition and a sense of justice. In one letter, Blackwood wrote to his daughter, "I've made mistakes I can't undo, but I hope one day someone will use the evidence of those mistakes to do good. The truth always finds a way to surface, even when we try to bury it." Nathan realized that, in a way, he was fulfilling the last wish of a man who had died decades before. But the restoration wasn't easy. There were multiple sabotage attempts, anonymous threats, and constant pressure from groups trying to stop the memorial from opening. On one occasion, someone set fire to part of the garden. Another time, they smashed all the newly installed windows. "Why won't they give up?" Dorothy asked, after yet another act of vandalism. "Because as long as this house stands, it will remind them of things they'd rather forget." "And aren't you tired of fighting?" Nathan looked at the partially restored house, imagining what it would be like when finished. "I am, but I'm also proud." "Of what?" "Of choosing to do what I believed was right, not what was easy." The memorial's opening was scheduled for 3 months later, and Nathan knew it would be controversial. Half the town supported the project, seeing it as an important way to preserve local history. The other half viewed it as an affront to traditional families. But there was also a third group, perhaps the most important, the families who had reclaimed their land thanks to the documents Nathan uncovered. Edith Miller became one of the project's strongest supporters. "This house gave my family back its dignity," she said in an interview. "My grandfather wasn't crazy when he said our land was stolen. It was true, and now we can prove it." With the money from selling the recovered land, Edith was able to buy a better home and still had enough to invest in her grandchildren's education. Stories like hers multiplied, creating a growing wave of support for the memorial. But Nathan also met with descendants of families forced to return land. Some of these conversations were difficult. "My family bought that land in good faith," said Charles Harrison, grandson of one of those involved in the original scheme. "We didn't know it had been obtained illegally." "I understand your position," Nathan replied. "But imagine how the wronged family feels after decades. Why settle this now? Why not leave the past in the past?" Because for some families, the past was never resolved. They lived 70 years, knowing they'd been robbed but couldn't prove it. These talks helped Nathan grasp the full complexity of the situation he'd uncovered. There were no clear villains or unquestionable heroes, just people trying their best under difficult circumstances. As the opening date neared, tensions in town rose. Groups organized protests both for and against the memorial. The mayor tried to mediate, suggesting a delay until emotions cooled. "No," Nathan said. "Delaying would mean giving in to pressure. If I believe this memorial matters, I must have the courage to open it. Even if it leads to clashes, even then." Margaret Blackwood supported Nathan's decision. "My father spent his life running from the consequences of his actions. I won't let his legacy remain an escape." On opening day, hundreds gathered outside the house, protesters on both sides, journalists, local officials, and onlookers. Nathan was nervous but resolute. He had prepared a simple speech about the importance of facing uncomfortable history. "This house," he said, standing on the porch where months earlier Walter Simmons and Frank Peterson had mocked him, "is more than a restored property. It represents our ability to confront hard truths and learn from them." Some in the crowd cheered, others booed. "No one here is entirely guilty or entirely innocent," Nathan continued. "We're all shaped by decisions made generations ago, but we're also responsible for the choices we make today." He invited everyone inside to see the memorial and form their own opinions. The first to enter was Edith Miller, followed by her entire family. The second was Margaret Blackwood, walking slowly but with dignity. To Nathan's surprise, the third person to enter was Charles Harrison, the grandson of the family that had lost land in the process. "I came to better understand what happened," he said. "If I have to live with the consequences, at least I want to know the whole story." Throughout the day, hundreds of people visited the memorial. There were heated discussions, moments of tension, but also productive conversations between people who had never spoken before. Nathan observed it all with a mix of pride and apprehension. He had managed to create something unique, a space where the complex and controversial history of his town could be openly discussed. But he also knew his work was just beginning. The memorial would need to handle ongoing attempts at censorship, political pressures, and the constant need to mediate between groups with opposing views. In the months that followed, the memorial became an unexpected attraction. People from other towns came to visit, curious about how a community had decided to confront historical secrets. Universities sent students to study the case. Journalists wrote articles about the experience. Lawyers used the model as an example in other cases of historical justice. Nathan found himself transformed from a local carpenter into a nationally recognized figure for his work in historical preservation and social justice. But what mattered most to him was the local impact. The memorial had created a space for conversations that were once impossible in the town. Families who had become enemies over the case began speaking again. They didn't necessarily agree, but at least they were communicating. Edith Miller and Charles Harrison, representing opposing sides of the controversy, started meeting regularly to discuss ways to resolve similar conflicts in the future. "We can't change the past," Edith said during one of these meetings, "but we can try to prevent similar injustices from happening again." Charles agreed. "And we can try to find ways to make amends without causing new suffering." These conversations led to the creation of a community mediation committee, with representatives from all groups affected by the case. The committee developed protocols for handling land disputes, investigating historical claims, and mediating conflicts between families. Nathan was invited to coordinate the committee, but declined. "My role was to start this conversation," he explained. "Now you need to continue it without me." He was beginning to understand that his real work wasn't to solve every problem he'd uncovered, but to create conditions for the community to solve them on its own. A year after the memorial's opening, Nathan finally moved into the restored house. It was strange living at the epicenter of so much controversy, but also rewarding. Every morning, he woke up in a room carefully restored to reflect the original 1940s architecture. Every night he fell asleep, knowing his home was visited daily by people trying to better understand their town's history. Dorothy moved to a nearby apartment where she could follow developments without being at the center of the commotion. "Son," she said during a visit, "you've accomplished something I never thought possible." "What?" "You turned an old house into something that truly changed lives." Nathan smiled, remembering Walter and Frank's laughter on the day of the purchase. "They said I'd thrown my money away. And what would you say to them today?" "That sometimes what looks like trash to some people is treasure to others." Margaret Blackwood became a regular visitor to the house. At 85, she enjoyed walking through the rooms and sharing stories about what it was like living there as a child. "My father would be proud," she said during one of those visits. "He always wanted this house to serve something greater than just sheltering a family." "Do you think he imagined it would be something like this?" "Not exactly like this. But he knew that someday someone would find the documents and have to decide what to do with them. He'd be happy to know that person chose justice." Nathan still faced challenges. Some people in town still saw him as a troublemaker. His career as a carpenter never fully recovered, as many potential clients preferred to avoid controversy. But he had found a new calling as the memorial's coordinator and a mediator for historical conflicts. Other towns began seeking his help with similar situations. "I never thought buying an old house would lead me to a whole new career," he remarked to his mother. "Life has its surprises. What matters is that you followed your conscience." 2 years after buying the house, Nathan received an unexpected visit. Walter Simmons, now on parole after serving part of his sentence for trespassing and conspiracy, showed up at the memorial's door. "May I come in?" he asked, clearly uncomfortable. "Of course." Walter walked through the rooms in silence, observing how the house had been transformed. When they reached the main hall, he finally spoke. "I came to apologize." "For what?" "For trying to stop you from doing the right thing. At the time, all I could think about was what my family would lose if the truth came out. And now I see that some truths need to come out, even when they hurt." Walter explained he had spent the last few months reflecting on what had happened. "My family did lose land when everything came to light. Land we'd considered ours for decades. I'm sorry for that." "Don't be. The land wasn't really ours. It was obtained through fraud. It was only right that it be returned to its true owners." He looked around the room, taking in the exhibits that told the story of the case. "You know a lot of people are still angry with you, right?" "I know. But I also know many others are grateful. And how do you handle that? By focusing on what was gained, not what was lost. Walter nodded. I think I've learned an important lesson. Sometimes doing what's right means accepting personal losses. Before leaving, he asked one last question. If you could go back, would you do anything differently? Nathan thought for a moment. I'd do some things differently. I'd try to find ways to lessen the pain for innocent people. But the main decision, not to hide the truth, that I'd do the same. In the following years, the memorial became a respected institution in town. Schools organized educational visits. Researchers came to study the model of historical justice it represented. Most importantly, the town had developed a new maturity in handling complex issues. Problems that were once swept under the rug were now discussed openly. Nathan married Emily, a historian who came to study the memorial and ended up staying. Together, they continued developing educational programs and community mediation projects. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after buying the house, Nathan was in the garden when he saw a young man standing in front of the property, studying it with interest. Can I help you? I was thinking of buying an old house to restore, the young man said. I heard about what you did here and wanted to see it for myself. And what do you think? Impressive, but a little scary too. What if I buy an old house and find secrets I don't want to uncover? Nathan smiled. Then you'll have to decide whether you're the kind of person who prefers to live with truth or with ignorance. And which one do you recommend? Depends on what you value more, peace of mind or peace of conscience. The young man grew thoughtful. Are they different? Sometimes, yes. Peace of mind is when you have no problems to solve. Peace of conscience is when you do what you believe is right, even if it creates problems. And which one do you have? Nathan looked at his house, thinking of everything that had happened since he bought it. Peace of conscience. Definitely peace of conscience. The young man thanked him for the advice and walked away. Nathan watched him go, remembering himself 5 years earlier, when he was just a carpenter looking for a house to renovate. That evening during dinner with Emily, he told her about the conversation with the young man. Do you think you made the right choice? She asked. I made the choice I could live with. For me, it was the only possible one. Even knowing all the complications that came after? Especially knowing the complications. If I'd taken the easy way out, I'd still be questioning myself today about what could have been different. Emily smiled. That's why I fell in love with you, for the courage to choose what's right, even when it's hard. Outside, the memorial continued to receive nighttime visitors, people who came to reflect on their own ethical decisions, inspired by the story of the house that had become a symbol of integrity in times of moral compromise. Nathan had discovered that sometimes buying an old house means buying far more than bricks and wood. It means buying responsibilities, challenges, and opportunities to make a difference. And in the end, it had been worth far more than any amount of money he was offered to walk away. The old house everyone laughed at him for choosing had become the most important project of his life, not just because of the physical restoration, but because of the moral restoration it had made possible for the entire community. Walter and Frank were right about one thing. That house had truly changed everything for Nathan, but not in the way they'd imagined. Instead of ruining his life, it had given him a purpose he'd never thought possible. And every night when he turned off the memorial's lights and locked the doors, Nathan knew he'd done something that would last far beyond his own lifetime. He'd created a place where truth could be discussed, justice could be pursued, and people could learn to face the past constructively. The old house had become exactly what he'd seen in it from the very first day, a place with endless potential, waiting only for someone brave enough to realize it. The end now. Tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your sincere thoughts in the comments. Do you think Nathan made the right decision? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartfelt stories.